to move up to item 9, which is regards to transfer of ordinance 2 fees, and Val already skipped down. No, there she is.
Here.
We want to amend the district's operating rules and regulations, and is there, we've talked
Mr.
about
Chairman,
this.
if I may, I think this is just to kind of clarify the actions that were taken previously by the board, correct, Eric?
Yeah, I think there's that potential anyway, that it could be just a clarification of the intent of the board with the adoption of the policy initially. I think there may have been some conflicting information with respect to the discussion of the board that took place at that meeting as opposed to what the written policy was. I think the board had at least it appeared to hearing that the board had an understanding what the policy was going to say, and you could read the policy as currently written that it's not consistent with the board's understanding. So depending on the direction the board is, it could be just a clarification of the board's intent at that time it was adopted.
Now, I think this came about through an application
Yes, there have been some applications received for transfers of ordinance 2 fees since the policy was adopted. And at least one of those applications raised a question as far as clarifying the issue, as far as, more specifically the issue is, at the public meeting where this policy was adopted, there was some discussion back and forth about whether there was going to be, it would be allowed for ordinance 2 fees to be transferred from one property owner to a different property owner, as opposed, meaning that the owner of the property where the ordinance 2 fee was originally granted for could transfer that to a different piece of property owned by a different owner. And during that discussion about transfers across ownership, there were questions asked about whether that be allowed, and the answers were no, and I think the board's understanding was that that wouldn't be allowed. But like I say, if you strictly read the policy as written, it doesn't have language that expressly prohibits that sort of a transfer. I think it was the board's understanding, but the policy written at that date didn't have that sort of limiting language across ownership, and so it was adopted as it was written as of that date, and it didn't have that limitation, even though I think that was the board's intent and understanding what the policy said.
This is one of the few times I've been on the board long enough that it happened while I was on the board. So I know what my intent was. Would it be okay if we allowed the applicant to get up and state what he's requesting, what his thoughts are? I mean, that's.
I have no problem with
If
it.
the board wants to take public comments about the policy or pending application, I think that'd be fine.
Okay, is the applicant here?
Yeah, thank you. Richard Iselson, I'm here representing Nevada Residential Construction. And this particular situation came about up in the Stonehaven subdivision in phase 1. And we had an individual that purchased 2 lots adjacent to each other. And part of the agreement that we had with her was that we would combine the lots into one, and she would only, pay HOA fees on one lot, and she would be able to utilize that lot as one lot. We did have the secondary water line to the property removed, and as we did with some others where we transferred ordinance 2 fees to other lots.
You mean
in
the
that subdivision.
primary water line?
The primary
not
water
the
line,
secondary.
yeah, thank you, from the main. But what has occurred is because we were the ones that paid the ordinance 2 fees, then the property changed hands and was deeded to her. Now when we are trying to get these ordinance 2 fees to use on a different parcel, it's a different owner, because she is now the owner, but we were the original applicant. And so all we're wanting to do is transfer those ordinance 2 fees that we paid originally to another parcel of land that we're developing.
You paid the ordinance 2 fees, or she paid them?
We did.
I remember, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, If I may.
Sure, I'm sorry.
I remember when this whole thing came before us, and I was in favor of it. Basically, you had a subdivision that you were combining the lots. You were taking the excess ordinance 2 fees from those lots, moving them onto a different phase.
Yes.
One of my biggest concerns was, and I think I voiced it in that meeting, we can go back and check the meetings. One of my biggest concerns was setting a precedence where we allowed ordinance 2 fees to be transferred from one entity to another entity. And I understand this is kind of a round peg, not fitting in the square hole type deal, but I really, my concern is setting a precedence where we allow a developer to transfer his ordinance 2 fees to another, and to a whole different entity. And that was my concern in the original meeting, it's still my concern.
I think part of the confusion came that we did combine several lots within this subdivision and transferred ordinance 2 fees to other lots in the subdivision without a problem. And that it was a simple transfer at that point because we were the owner of those lots when the transfer took place. The challenge on this particular issue is we had already deeded that property to the owner before the transfer of the ordinance 2 fees was requested. And so when it asked for the property owner, it was now the new owner of the property that was requesting the transfer, even though she was not the one who paid the ordinance 2 fees.
I understand.
And that water can't be used on that property because it's,
Yeah, it's no
you know.
longer needed, but my concern is obviously setting a precedent where we're allowing one owner to transfer ordinance 2 fees to another owner. I mean, you guys are creative, I'm sure there's a way to do it without having to, I mean, maybe it has to do with lot ownership or whatever, but my whole intent with that thing was to allow a specific owner to use it on his own property. And my concern is if we allow this, that we're gonna set a precedent that's gonna open Pandora's box, if you will.
I guess the question I have is, can we go back to who it was, who the entity was that paid the ordinance 2 fees? And if that is the same entity that wants to utilize them on another lot, I think that would take care of the problem. Because the current property owner, in fact, the individual that we sold the 2 lots to has now resold them as 1 lot, so we're into our third owner.
See, and that's, once again, that's going back to the, you know, I mean, I understand situation, I think, and, you know, I was understanding of the situations prior, but I just, on this one deal, I personally, I think we opened Pandora's box by doing anything other than sticking to what we had passed in the last meeting, which was that it had to be the same ownership. So,
This, you want to